In this tutorial, I'm going to take a look at what an unwrap is and how an unwrap works to try and explain it better. And I'm also just going to describe how I modeled this barrel. It's game res. You can see that it doesn't have a lot of polygons in it. It was modeled very quickly, very easily, and the one on the right is complete, and I actually textured it and unwrapped it in a very unique way that is very beneficial for speed. So I'm going to try and describe that as well. But for the beginner, it's kind of a starting point of understanding what's going to happen here to unwrap this. So let's get started with that. I'm just going to isolate this object so we can work on it. Now, this has been modeled very simply. If I go down to the editable spline level, you can see it's a simple spline, only a handful of verts in it, with Bezier handles. So there's a total of 14 vertices I had to model this entire thing. I didn't have to pull any other points. At no point in time did I use an editable poly. It's just an editable spline. One on the keyboard to get out of that. I used a lathe modifier, and in this particular case, I've decided to show symmetry and how it can symmetry in multiple axes. So I could have swept this all the way around with 360 degrees with more segments, but I decided to show it this way. So it's got a degrees of 90, and I decided to reduce the count of segments down for game use down to just 3. So we've got 3, 6, 9, 12 around the entire thing. Now, it's the same process if it's higher resolution as it is here. The symmetry has then been used to symmetry it all the way around, basically. So I've got them all turned on. So it's now symmetrying it in all axes. The pivot of the object I made sure was at the center of the spline. That is, you can see it's on that center line. Okay, and in the lathe modifier, I make sure that I have weld core turned on. And that welds that center point together, and you won't get any sort of um, artifacts happening in there. Okay, so that is kind of something to note. Now I have already turned on in the lathe modifier generate mapping coordinates. So effectively this is unwrapping the model to date. So it's going to be much easier for me to deal with because the lathe can actually flatten the entire thing for me. But I just want to show you some steps essentially to doing it a little more manually then. On top of the stack, let's add a UVW unwrap. So X on the keyboard and unwrap. You can just start typing and it'll come up. You can also find it in the menu up here under coordinates, or you can find it in the modifier list if you want to dig. You can also search for it in the model modifier list by typing in U, and it'll drop right down to everything that starts with U just to speed up your life. I prefer, just hitting a hotkey. Now, anywhere there's a green line initially is a seam in the unwrap. And so you can actually see it's not bad in some places, but the top and bottom are horrendous. So we're going to go about correcting this and making it look right. Now, when I open it, we have this UV space happening here. If I turn on select element, you can see that I have multiple elements going on here that are all overlapping. Now, generally again, overlapping UVs are frowned upon. However, in some situations, I use it all the time that way. Okay, so it entirely depends on what you're doing. So let's go about breaking this up and separating this so that we can texture it correctly. Top and bottom should probably get broken off because it would have elements going across, boards going across it. Okay. And so we need to flatten those out and make sure that it is flat. So that's going to be real easy. All we need to do is go into polygon and select all the polygons on the top. But because I'm lazy, I'm going to turn on the select by planar angle. So anything inside of 15 degrees angle change will get selected now. If you turn that up and crank it up, it's going to select more things because as it starts to look at the angles, it's going to select effectively everything at that point. Now, the 15 worked perfectly well. I'm going to select the top. Oh, and before I actually start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all this junk out of the way. So I tend to move everything out of the way. I'm just going to select the top. I'm going to hit quick planar map. Guess what? That's unwrapped for us. Okay, so to see that, I'm going to open up the checker pattern and I'm going to go down and put on, the checkerboard, or you could use the texture checker, the fancy one. And you'll notice my lighting is on and everything. It's because I'm in high quality. I'm just going to put it down in standard for this so it's not reflecting and glowing at us. You can see that this piece then is unwrapped correctly. I'm just going to move it off to the side. I'm going to grab the bottom, quick planar map it. Bottom's done, so they're completely flattened at this point. So the next thing is going to be breaking off some other pieces and elements that we want to be able to use. Now, some of it we're not going to be able to do in single pieces. Like take, for instance, if I grab everything around this piece here should get flattened out. Oh, and by the way, we have ignore back facing on. I'm going to turn that off. So if we grab that, and just something else to note, lasso selection tool, if you hit Q and repeatedly hit Q, it'll roll through it when this window is closed, because Q is another hotkey in here. So this is, this piece that is broken up already because the lathe partially did, an unwrap for us. So let's actually do this ourselves. And I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to recombine this by hitting quick planar map, which is going to create an unwrap that makes no sense whatsoever. Think of unwrapping, instead of like trying to wrap the texture around the objects, think about it in the idea of trying to flatten the object onto the texture map. Texture maps are flat and they're square effectively. So what we want to do is we want to unwrap it. So you could also think of that as like taking cardboard boxes out for recycle, and you need to flatten them down. If you just jump on the box, it'll crush the sides and you'll never get it very flat. But if you cut it into pieces and lay the panels flat, you can lay it completely flat on the ground now. And then what we want to do is make sure that there isn't a pile, but they're spread out. And we'll discuss that in a second. This is looking straight down on top from this yellow gizmo here. And you can see it's not exactly flat. So what we would want to do then is pick, some point on it that is going to be the back. And I'm going to go into edge mode, 2 on the keyboard, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for every single sub-object level of every modifier there is in Max, okay? So I'm going to grab this this point on the back here, this line here, and I'm just going to say break in here. Okay, so you can see there's a green line now down this edge. So we can unwrap this flatter. So back to the polygons, I'm going to grab that chunk. And I'm going to, in the unfold settings here, I'm going to make sure that I've got rotate and rescale, or rescale on, but let's see, pack off. We don't want them to pack at this point. We'll do that last. I'll show you why. And so if I flatten that now, you'll see this has been, placed in here, right? It's flattened it out. So we can do the same thing for each one of these. I'm going to grab a piece. You could even go and do the unfold now with detach on, and it'll detach that piece and do a new piece. However, it's flattening it out into all of those chunks again that were already worked on. Looks like I've got extra edges that I don't want in this case because I left the angle select on. So I got some angles I didn't want. I'm going to just pick those again. So again, quick planar map, find my seam on the other one, which is here, back to 2 on the keyboard, pick those 2 edges, run a knife down that, cut it, use the break, okay. Back to 3 in the keyboard into polygons, select it, and I'm just going to go and say unfold. So this is the peel mode. And then that one's peeled, and you can see it's flattened, okay. And we're just going to keep doing that all the way down to get those. So I'm just going to say quick planar, 2 in the keyboard, break, okay. So this is one way to go about doing it. Now, I already have some UVs on this. So what can happen is that we can actually start with something that has no UVs or really bad UVs. Like you can see all these odd green lines cutting in and out all over the place. Well, I'm working on this. I can end up with a bit of a headache because, it's like I may end up with cut lines where I don't want them. So generally what I do is I make sure I select all the polygons. So I'm in the polygon mode. You can go Control A and pick them all. And I'll do a quick planar map on the whole thing. This makes my UVs 100% unusable. Okay, so again, we can then start breaking things down. Quick planar, and then just start breaking it into the chunks. We're going to know that we're going to want to, break it all the way down the back here. So why don't I just do that in one go and just split it all the way down the back? I may not want to split it all the way down the front, so I'm just going to deselect those. And again, I have ignore back facing off. So this is going to split everything. Now I don't want to split the top. Those were done perfectly. Okay, so then I'm just going to hit break. I should be able then, now that I've done this is like going to be real easy. I'm going to go to polygon mode, select everything, and I'm going to go pack and turn off my detach just in case there's something else and see what happens. And what you're going to see is it's going to completely pack it. Now, this works. It's not bad. It may be, not quite as good as we want on another, sort of note here. So there's a couple of things we need to get right. One is we need to make sure that it's flat, that everything looks flat. So if we look at the checkerboard pattern, one of the things we want to have is the checkerboard not going all squirrely. Okay, you'll see sometimes it kind of wobbles all over the place. And the other thing we want to have is the same size checkerboard pattern all over. Okay, the pack did this with a rescale. It rescaled all the pieces so that they were the relative size to each other. Okay, so these things have been addressed and have worked quite well. The next thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we use up all of the space as much as possible. So right now, this represents the texture map that's going to get painted. That means all of these here that aren't being used are pixels that are going to be wasted. They need to load into memory, but they're just going to get thrown away because they're not being used. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to increase the size of the texture map to get the quality when you're painting on it. And you're just throwing away more and more pixels that are slowing down your renders. It's slowing down games if you're loading stuff into games. It's wasting UV space, okay? And we want to avoid that. So one of the things we can do to try and get around that is break this up more, okay? So we've got these chunks, and I'm going to go back to 2 in the keyboard, and we're going to break off some elements. So I've got this top broken off. This piece up here, I'm going to double click, and that's one of those metal straps around there. I'm just going to say break. And then I'm going to do it around each one of those metal pieces. And I'm just double clicking on an edge in edge mode here. And I'm going to say break. Now let's see what happens. Back to polygon mode, select everything, and I'm going to unfold again and see what happens. And it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse because these little pieces now are these long, thin bits, and it's not packing very well. This isn't going to pack the way that I want it. And you can see that I've got these halves. I'm not even quite sure what that is. That's that entire strip up top. So let's try this. Let's actually break it all the way around then instead. So let's break all the sides down. So we don't want those broken. And so I'm going to break that so that we have seams down both sides. Now we have panels that are here that are going to be smaller panels, okay? So you can see that if I select with the elements in here, I have these smaller panels. So let's see what happens when we unfold this and see if it packs. So it's starting to pack better. right? It's starting to get broken down into chunks that will pack better. Now, one thing to try too is when you do a pack, turn on rotate and see if it will straighten pieces out and pack them a little bit better. And we can start trying to lay these in here in some way that fills the space the best as possible. Okay. Um, you can kind of keep trying different pack methods and see if it resolves to something a little bit better. So this is better, but it's not great. Okay, so what we can then do is try some manual packing. So we'll only get so far sometimes. And so here's how I go about doing manual packing. This is the UV space and it needs to stay square. Okay, there's memory reasons for this, so that needs to remain square. But I need to try and resize all of these at the same time because I can't change their relative size to each other, or else the size of the squares on each one will become uneven, and that means that they won't be getting the same amount of pixels in them and whatnot. So we need to scale them all at the same time. So what I do is I find a smaller square. So let's say that square there, okay? And I pack them into that square. And so we can jam some of this stuff a little bit tighter. I can start pushing some things closer together. I could rotate this one to save some space and jam that a little bit tighter. You can use your rotate tools and all your WER tools to do that. Okay, so you've got those, and Q becomes this sort of freeform mode that you can use. So I'm going to actually just take some of the things that make sense to go together and jam some of this stuff together. So I'm going to grab this one, and by the way, if you hold down Control, it'll snap to angles. So those are tighter together now. I'm going to jam these down and see how close I can get them and see if I can get them sort of nipped into as close as possible and save some space there. We'll see if we have to rotate these around. These are going to get rotated. That's probably already getting tighter on the pack again. And then I can start taking other ones and start jamming those together and see how close I can get those to work. I'm just going to pull that out of there and see if I can just put this on top of each other. Starts making more sense looking at your texture map as well. Might be a little too tight over here. I might be able to get these in here maybe. And then same thing here. Let's just rotate these over and see if we can pack those into the space. And then we have these two as well that are going to get placed in here somewhere. So we may actually have, it might be too far to the side, but let's actually just take a look at what happens here. I'm going to jam that in there. And it's close, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So what we do now is we take the whole thing, we select it with the freeform, and then we scale it out. But what you want to do is hold down Control as you do that until it reaches the edge. Still have a lot of wasted space. So how can I use that wasted space? Can I get these moved in and get these to sort of fill in that space again? So can I, push them up? Can I fill things in somewhere? How can I jam them together? And we're going to sit there and play Tetris on this until we have a solution that makes more sense so that we have it closer and closer together. Is this boring and tedious? Yeah, it sure is. But if you want to get good unwraps, then it's often necessary. So I've just saved myself a bunch of space there. I'm going to select everything again in that freeform mode. I'm going to pull it out again. That's getting tighter and tighter. So this is your goal, is the least amount of wasted space that you possibly can. Okay, so there are, sort of some rules, but what we can do is we can start fudging some of those rules too. Um, you know, really what it comes down to is every rule can be broken. But I'll tell you that the wasted pixel space is a high priority item. We don't want to be wasting pixels because those are going to be loading and they're just getting thrown away because those pixels aren't actually being seen on the model. So there you go. There's an unwrap that's starting to work. We could scale maybe some of these and cheat their size a little bit to fill in some more. You know, maybe we could take these ones here and just say, well, what happens if we just suck up some more pixel space with those for the fun of it? It's going to stretch the texture around those a little bit, but it's not so bad. At least I'm not wasting as much. I'm going to add one more thing on here is that people don't realize that when you collapse the stack, if you collapse the stack, in this case, I probably wouldn't. It's done. I'm going to leave it like this so that I don't have to come back to it. But one of the issues can be is people will mess with the unwrap and they'll mess up their model because they can go down below it. You've got to understand when that message pops up on your screen and tells you that you are going to change topology that can affect the modifiers above it, you need to read it and pay attention to what it means. So in this case, if you collapse a stack, by the way, you don't lose your UVs. If I stick an unwrap modifier back on top of it, open the editor, it's all still there. Okay, so it is stored at the vertex level is the best way I can describe that. Okay, so all that information is stored at the vertex level. So let me just grab both of these again. And there is the unwrapped and the unwrapped and textured version. And of course, we can go to high quality and you can see what it looks like in sort of all its glory. So there's the basic goal of unwrapping an object. Next video I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a way that I unwrap and texture at the same time.